Good afternoon, everybody. I am Erin May Quaid. I'm the Advocacy Director for Gender Justice. With me, as always,
I'm Jess Braverman. I'm the Legal Director at Gender Justice.
Awesome. And tonight we have our SCOTUS chat, Ketanji Brown Jackson edition. We're so excited to talk about this Supreme Court nominee, her historic nomination, her judicial philosophy, where Jess is going to just nerd out about that, and talk a little bit more about her. I'm really excited. How about you, Jess?
I'm stoked. I think this is great.
Me too. Well, I'm just going to start with a little bit of her, like her bio, her background. So Ketanji Brown Jackson is from Florida. She went to Harvard undergrad and law school. She clerked for Justice Stephen Breyer, who she was replacing on the Supreme Court. She has been on, she was a public defender, and she was on the district court, the Court of Appeals, and has now been nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. If and when she's confirmed, she will be the first Black woman to ever sit on the Supreme Court. So it's a historic nomination. And can you believe that every Supreme Court decision for the entirety of the United States has happened without Black women?
No, I mean, it depends on the decision.
They've all, every single one has been made without.
It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
It's 2022, and here we are. So just a brief bio. And she's also a mom of two, which I think is super important. She has school-age kids. One of her kids is still in high school. So I think that's a really important thing to note. And her parents were sitting behind her at the confirmation hearings, and her husband was crying. She's a really beautiful family. Do you want to talk a little bit about her as a judge, Jess, and her judicial philosophy? I just am waxing poetic about her person, but do you want to talk about her as a judge?
Yeah, I think what she said something to the effect of she doesn't have there's not a judicial philosophy that she would name that she ascribes to. However, what she says is the meaning of the Constitution is fixed and it doesn't change or evolve, and you apply established constitutional principles to new circumstances. And so that could kind of sound like an originalist. She does say, I look at the meaning of the Constitution at the time, the people who wrote it, what they would think these words mean, which is, a fairly common idea of what originalism is. But when you really dig in, what she's saying is, I have to follow precedent. And what the Supreme Court has done over the years is acknowledge that the Constitution has protections, has rights that may not word for word be in there. So the Constitution she didn't talk about abortion, but the Constitution doesn't mention the word abortion. That doesn't mean it doesn't protect your right to an abortion. And the Constitution doesn't say if there's a law that subjects women to different treatment, you subject it to intermediate scrutiny. There's stuff that the Constitution may not explicitly say, but the court has recognized. And so it's kind of an interesting thing she did, where she's I do this thing you all want me to say I do, which is I look at the original meaning at the time that it was written, but I also look at precedent, and here's what the court has done. And it was kind of nice. It was nice to see how she kind of played that.
Yeah, she talked more about a methodology than having a philosophy, right? Here's it was so clear in her questions and her answers that she's a real judge, right? They would ask, our next section is really about what was the deal with all these questions, but it was so clear in her answering that she's just a really thorough, fair-minded judge who approaches judicial decisions judiciously. And I think that was really refreshing for a lot of legal nerds. Instead of kind of being cagey, she would describe a thorough methodology for getting to decisions.
Yeah, and I think at one point, I don't know if this was in writing or in the questioning, unfortunately we were busy with work and couldn't watch the whole thing as much as I would have loved to, but part of it was also kind of awful the way they treated her. So I don't know. Yeah. But one thing she was kind of saying was, they asked her, do you agree with Justice Breyer, who you clerked for, that the Constitution is a living, breathing document? And she was like, well, the Constitution doesn't change, its meaning is fixed, it doesn't change. However, here's what the court has done with the Constitution, right? It has acknowledged that certain rights you have to factor in an evolving society, right? Cruel and unusual punishment, that factors in evolving concepts over time of what is cruel and unusual. And I think she was really just finessing these answers, but they, I'm glad that she was just, I'm glad she didn't do the thing where she's like, I can't talk about that. I felt
Right.
like she was giving more answers than we'd heard from like Amy Coney Barrett and others. And I thought her answers were really great. They're really promising. And they make me really look forward to her being on the Supreme Court.
And she didn't yell at the senators or accuse them of liking beer, which was like a refreshing change of pace from Brett Kavanaugh.
She made it through without talking about how much she loves beer.
Yeah. So this next section I really did title like, what's the deal with the questions? So I think just if I can like take a personal minute, like every Black woman recognized like the virulent hatred with which some of these senators came to ask questions. And so there is just a strain of like, you have to be twice as good to be taken half as seriously. And that has certainly happened here. But some of the questions were just like, if you weren't tuned into some parts of the right-wing internet, or if you weren't tuned into like some conspiracy theories, like it would
be not on 4chan or whatever.
Yeah, if you're not on 4chan or like Truth Social where you're like retruthing and I don't even know, then some of this might have seemed really absurd. So we're going to break some of that down. The first big piece that came out a lot, Jess, was talking about her sentencing and specifically around some sex crime cases, if I remember.
Sure.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about where does this sentencing stuff come from and why was it such a big part of the question?
Yeah. So one really weird thing they did was like, she's issued, I don't know, like hundreds, like she was on the federal bench since like 2013, right? So she's issued like hundreds of decisions, or she's sentenced hundreds of people, right? And the way sentencing works is there's a commission. So she has served on the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. But there's a commission that kind of sets the like, for this crime, if you have this kind of criminal history, this is how many years you do. And then there's exceptions, right? Like the court can consider certain factors and lower the number or even raise the number depending on, if you meet those factors. And so one thing that we're really fixated on was her sentencing in cases involving possession of child pornography. And they were trying to say, like, look how easy she is, look how lenient she is on people who possess child pornography. And what she was saying is like, first of all, it's really common if you just possess, because like federal sentencing is bonkers. Like, 40-year, like we're talking like decades and decades and decades in prison, for drug crimes, for all sorts of things. And so it's not wildly uncommon for courts to deviate from what the Sentencing Commission recommends. And so if you take something like child pornography, if the sentencing is kind of made for people who produce child pornography and then it's being applied to someone who possesses child pornography but has never produced it, it's kind of like, do these numbers still make sense? And then if you look at someone like, are they accepting treatment? Are they remorseful? Are they, do they have a history? Do they, how old are they?
Right.
So she factors in, all these kinds of things, and it's really common. I read something like, what is it, like only a third of people with this particular conviction actually face the, what the guidelines recommend. So she's following the recommendations. Like whenever someone gets sentenced, probation recommends something, and it could be within the guidelines, or they can say, we think you should depart from the guidelines for whatever reason. And so she's saying like, look, I'm listening to probation. I'm listening to what's going on with this person. I'm listening to this person's life story. And I'm listening to like, are they actually making change? Are they it's, you factor in all of these things. And I think the reason they just stuck with like child pornography is because I think it's something people will easily say, but how can you possibly be lenient? Like, when would you ever deviate for child porn? And it's like, people are complicated. People's lives are complicated. And like, sometimes there's a deal, right? And the prosecutors like want to strike a deal that involves like less than the recommended time. Sometimes probation's like, look, this person is really making a change. You really can't, like, mandatory sentencing is just a terrible idea. And so they wanted to pick a group of people that, it's really hard for the public to be like, oh, because if it's marijuana, right? People are gonna be like, you send someone to prison for marijuana,
Right.
So they pick someone who possesses child porn, but like her sentencing was not outside the range of what judges do nationally, like how people are sentenced, and you can actually track that through the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. So they just picked something that they knew people would be like, oh my God, I can't believe she's soft on child porn. Like, that is not the case.
Right. Well, and I think it's also important to note too that there's another element here too, and that's the element of QAnon, which is this conspiracy theory. It's wide ranging, but that Democrats like drink the blood of children, and there's hashtags like Save the Children, which has actually been very detrimental to the actual organization Save the Children that does really great work. This is where that man who went to that pizza parlor in DC and with a gun, demanding that this non-existent basement, they let out these children. So it's a very dangerous, wild conspiracy theory that's been embraced by a particular part of the right. And so some of this questioning was actually a nod to that conspiracy theory group. And I think it's really important to name that, because it is a very dangerous conspiracy theory that has led to violent behavior from people who believe in it. And I think, particularly there were a few senators who weren't just taking issue with, a particular sentence, but were actually trying to like give a wink, a nod, a whistle to a particular group of people of like, look, this is another one of those types of people. And so it was really, it was really scary to watch that conspiracy theory kind of work its way into the Senate Judiciary Committee, into the questioning of like a very serious, legitimate judge who has, sentenced hundreds of people and has also worked as a public defender. And so, I just wanted to name too that like in addition to trying to pick like some of the quote unquote worst things, it was also an effort to kind of like nod to a particularly heinous part of the electorate.
Yeah, absolutely. And they know people don't understand sentencing, so they can frame it as like, why aren't you just following the law? Why aren't you and like she was on the commission. She knows how like she served on the US Sentencing Commission. Like she knows how it works. She's not just like a sentencing anarchist. Like she's doing things she's allowed to do, and she's considering people's like humanity and redemption, which I would hope like everyone in the system does, because what is the point of the system if it's not to like better society, better people, make sure, like I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
know.
it was the difference between like a conspiracy theory and like a real judge, right? Like there were lots of times where she was asked questions that were meant to be political or meant to bring in, Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation got brought up a lot, and they would ask her questions and she'd be like, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. Like, I don't know how to answer that because I have no idea what you're talking about. Like she clearly doesn't spend her time trolling Twitter, finding, the latest thing to be outraged about. I would be surprised if she's heard about the Oscar slap, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
How is she going to protect future comedians from slaps?
If she's not in the
if she's not, yeah, exactly.
So there were some other, wackadoo questions too. One, Marsha Blackburn asked her, define woman.
We know what that was about, right?
Yeah, that was about trans inclusion. But there was a lot of questions about like new rights being created, or do you believe that there are rights not enumerated in the Constitution? Do you want to talk a little bit about what we can glean from those questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think what she was saying, and it's true, is like she's bound by stare decisis. So as a lower court judge, you're bound by precedent, meaning like courts above you decide things and you follow the law. So they say the Constitution protects this, and you say, okay, they told me the Constitution protects this, and that's what I have to keep in mind when I hear this case, right? When you are like SCOTUS and no one's telling you what to do, you're still bound by what's called stare decisis, which is the idea of like, we don't just overturn precedent willy-nilly. Like if SCOTUS rules something, we tend to keep that going. And other judges, the court's not big on that, mostly because of they want to overturn Roe v. Wade, right? They want there to not be an abortion right. And so they're kind of like stare decisis. Whoever said we had to do stare, but she's kind of like, look, I'm bound by stare decisis, and under stare decisis, I have to follow Supreme Court rulings. And so, yes, the Constitution is fixed. I'm using its original meaning, but like, look at what the court has done with that, right? If the court says like the Constitution protects your right to an abortion, I'm bound to, we have to like follow that. If the Constitution, protects you from invidious discrimination, like if a state government passes a law that categorizes people by race or gender, and there's not really a reason for it, like we're gonna really look at that law, we might find it unconstitutional, right? There's all these things the court has done with the Constitution that's not explicitly in there. And she's kind of saying, like, I'm not going to ignore that stuff. And the Supreme Court has made rulings that certain rights, like, evolve with our society. Otherwise, like, how is the Constitution going to function, right? Like, we don't have, like, the right to bear arms isn't just like muskets, and the right to, like, it's
the right to free speech did not originally include tweeting at your member of Congress.
Exactly, right. So, like, we have to kind of realize we're living in an evolving society. So I think what she's saying is, like, the court has done this. I'm not going to undo it. It's stare decisis. Like, why would you ask me to just kind of, like, throw everything out as though I'm some sort of, like, queen judge and start afresh?
I mean, I think the reason is because, they're hoping that the court will do that. And it wasn't just Roe v. Wade, and it wasn't just abortion. Throughout the week, we heard, calling into question Loving v. Virginia, which established the right to interracial marriage, Griswold, which is the right to contraception. Of course, Obergefell was brought up, so marriage equality was brought up numerous times. I think if there was one thing that I took away from this confirmation hearing, is that the anti-abortion senators feel like they've won, because they really didn't bring it up a lot. They kept bringing up marriage equality. There was a senator who said that, Loving v. Virginia, interracial marriage should have been up to the states, in Griswold. And so I really think that it was a signal to, like, here's where we're hoping that this Supreme Court will go after other things that people have in the United States. So I just want to be really clear that, as they question stare decisis, as they question previous decisions, I think this is what's on the line. It's, as we said with Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation, these are the things that they're going after. It's not just abortion, and they're not just going to stop there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are these terms that come up. It's like substantive due process. Like, there's substantive due process, fundamental rights. It's these terms people use sometimes to describe things that are explicitly in the Constitution, but other times not. So, like, abortion, marriage broadly, marriage broadly. So, like, what they really mean is, like, same-sex marriage. Yeah. And so, they're talking about abortion without talking about it, by lumping it in with, like, anything that's a right that's not, like, explicitly, like, this word is in the Constitution. And so that's kind of how they talk about abortion without talking about it. Like, if something's not explicitly in there, will you say that it's a right? And what Ketanji Brown Jackson's kind of saying is, like, well, SCOTUS has said it's a right, and I'm bound by these prior rulings. And she's correct.
Which is what you want. So, and I just want to say, for anyone who's watching on any of the platforms, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments, and we can make sure to answer them, because we are coming up to the end. So I want to just talk a little bit about where the vote stands now. So today, the vote to send this to the full Senate came out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee is even Republicans and Democrats. So it was an even vote. In the Senate, it was on party lines, 11-11, I believe it is. And so that went to the Senate. A deadlocked vote still goes forward. However, I think all of the Democratic senators have announced their intention to support Ketanji Brown Jackson. If there are Democrats that aren't going to, they have not said so. And then, as of like 4 minutes ago, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitt Romney are all Republican senators that have said that they would vote for Judge Brown Jackson. And I think it's important to know that I believe this is the third time she's appeared before the Senate for confirmation to a court. So it'd be weirder for someone like, Lindsey Graham, who literally just voted to confirm her to the district court last year, to change their vote than it would be for her to, it's very expected that she'll again clear the Senate for confirmation.
Yeah, it was pretty recent that she was moved from district court up a level to the circuit. I think it was the DC circuit.
Yes.
Which is the appeals level. So, like, it's like federal district court, circuit court, SCOTUS.
Thank you for that. Yeah. We should get you a chart that you can just.
Yeah, my hand's like above the camera, so no one knows what it's like, the shadow docket, like.
Yeah, the shadow docket. So that's exciting. it looks like she's, in the grand scheme of things, it's been a pretty quick confirmation process, and it should be pretty easy. I think it's important to know too that she enjoys the highest approval ratings of any justice since John Roberts was confirmed, I believe in like '02. I might get that wrong, but it's definitely since him. So I think it's like 68% of Americans want her to be confirmed and, think she'd be great. So I think it was a detriment to any senator who votes against her confirmation. I think watching a predominantly white male Senate Judiciary Committee grill this Black woman in ways that were just like racially, not even like undertoned, it was overtoned, I think didn't sit well with a lot of people. And I think, like when history looks back on this moment and the confirmation of the first Black woman to the United States Supreme Court, I think it's just going to say a lot about this moment and about the senators, how they vote.
Yeah, no, well, yeah. We believe she will be confirmed. We believe that she will be the next Supreme Court justice, and we are very much looking forward to it.
Yes, we really are. Do you want to just end, Jess, on just kind of your thoughts as this historic nomination is going through, why it matters?
Yeah. So, I always think about this like weird thing. So you may remember like Justice Scalia, he was like a conservative judge. He does not like the gays. He was really good on criminal issues though. So when I was a public defender, if he wrote an opinion, I'd be like, oh, yes. But like as anything else, like as a gay person, as a woman, as like all these things, it's like, oh no. But in this one opinion about like searches done with like heat sensing items, he said this weird thing where he was like, I mean, the privacy concerns are so serious because like this thermovision thing might disclose, for example, at what hour each night the lady of the house takes her daily sauna and bath. And it's like, what are you talking, like, what are you talking about? But, the idea that people's lives, people's upbringings, what people are used to in their day-to-day life don't kind of infuse their decisions in the court it's ludicrous. Like you can't function that way, right? Like you're just informed by your life experience. And I think it's really important to have judges on the Supreme Court who like, I can't speak to what everyone's experienced, right? But like to be, like a Black woman at Harvard, to be, a clerk, to do all these things, it's really hard. You have to deal with a lot of like overt racism and not overt, less overt racism. And then the law is pretty racist. And, it's, you kind of have to put up with a lot. And I think it is important that there's people on the Supreme Court who understand that and, who have like various life experiences. And if you look at the opinions that are being written, like every time Sotomayor writes an opinion, I'm like, I know that she's going to remember there are actual human beings involved. Like these aren't like law review articles or like abstract cases or, because what happens is a case is at a lower court and the people, right? Like there's people in front of a judge and they're telling the judge or the jury a story and everyone's listening. And, then the case goes on appeal and it's like the legal issues plucked out. Right. And it becomes a little more abstract. And then by the time something makes it to SCOTUS, you can forget that there's human beings involved. Right. And so I often think of like Sotomayor, who actually is like, hey, this is like what it's actually like. And I think it's important to understand what different people's lives are like so that like that can be reflected in how the Supreme Court rules. Like the idea that any of them are just like calling balls and strike, like you'd have to be naive to believe that, right? That doesn't mean that they're all off the rails. It doesn't mean that they're not informed by, let's say, stare decisis or what's in the Constitution, right? It doesn't mean they're all just doing what they want. But the idea that like you don't have to have any life experience, you can like grow up in a cave as long as you're smart enough and do a good job, do justice to our Constitution. Like, no. How about you, Karen? Oh, go ahead.
No, I think it matters for their ability to understand some of the arguments that were made. I think back to the Dobbs v. Jackson hearing where, Amy Coney Barrett was like, well, why do we need abortion? Because you can just surrender a child for, and I'm using her words, that's not a word I would use, a place for adoption, but you can surrender a child for adoption. And that is fully informed by her role as an adoptive parent, obviously. And as someone who's never had a medical issue while giving birth or, all of these things, right? Or Justice Roberts, there was a case in like 2015 about drug sniffing dogs and at one point, Justice Roberts was like, well, I don't understand why this is a big deal. Like, from what everyone's told me, you know, when you get pulled over, the officer just says license and registration. And there was like laughter in the courtroom because you were like, clearly you've never been pulled over. And it's very evident that if you have been, very different experience, right? So that stuff does matter for like understanding the arguments that people are making and the real world experience that people have.
Right. And like if they're hearing a case, let's say about an abortion restriction and they have to weigh the burden, like how do you understand what it's like to be working like, 3 jobs, taking care of however many kids, like, and then having to do all like drive to a state where you have to do 2 clinic visits, because there's a mandatory waiting period in a 2 clinic visit. Like, you have to have people on the court and whether she does or not, I don't know enough about her personal life to know what she does and hasn't experienced, but I do think it's just important that there's lots of different people with lots of different life experiences on the Supreme Court. And as a former federal defender, I mean, I think she is someone who has at the very least like heard people's different life experiences, like heard, what might drive someone to do something that other people think is like abhorrent or wrong or whatever. Like you understand the humanity behind that and you understand the need for like mercy, right, in the criminal legal system. And I think that's really important. And so I do think, it can't just be a bunch of like old white people on the Supreme Court.
Right.
Like, and it can't just be a bunch of former prosecutors and former law, we love law firm attorneys, but like it can't all just be people who've only been in private practice, in private civil practice or whatever it may be, like to only, civil defense attorneys or prosecutors or it can't just be that. It has to be lots of different experiences.
Right. I really love what you're saying is, someone who's been a defender, public defender, has encountered so many different people who've, interacted with the criminal legal system for whatever reason. Like your ability to understand all of the circumstances that bring someone to you is just expanded. It just is.
Yeah, like you can really understand. I mean, you can. I mean, one way of understanding it is to live it, right? And I'm never gonna understand it at that level. But like people say, like, oh, it's easy, just show up to court. I've heard so many really valid reasons why people miss court. Like and it may not seem valid till you get to know them, right? Like the mental health stuff, the like caring for your family, the job, like there's so much going on. Like you start to really understand, like, okay, people's lives are really freaking hard, and like even when they're not, like stuff comes up, and like life is like you need to understand that because the court's not just reading texts and discerning what they mean, right? They're applying it to real life facts. So
that impact real people. That's so true. Well, I think that we have covered this particular topic very well, and I don't see any questions or comments that have come in through the chat, although I might have missed them, but I don't think so. We're using a new platform. Yay us, yay for tech. So I think we can wrap it up. This will not be our last SCOTUS chat by any means, but the next time we have one, Jess, we will likely get to have, will we have any opinions that have Justice Brown Jackson on them, do you think?
I don't know, because she hasn't been hearing the oral arguments and stuff. So I don't know how that works. I don't know when she would start opinioninating, as we say. Yeah. Opining.
Opining. There you go. I can't wait to see what her opinions are like. But we do know that the Supreme Court does have some important decisions coming up, namely Dobbs v. Jackson, the case that many are expecting will overturn Roe v. Wade. So we will be back with you, telling you what's going on, taking your questions, and continuing to debrief everything SCOTUS. Until then, we leave you to your evening, to your spring, and we will see you here next time. Thanks, everybody.